So, you want romance in the Middle Ages? Well, brace yourself. Because love back then was rarely candlelight dinners and moonlit serenades. It was more like cow manure, awkward negotiations, and the ever-present possibility of your crush dying from something with a name like the sweating sickness. Let's start with the basics. Dating apps? Not a thing. In fact, dating itself wasn't even a thing the way we know it. If you were a peasant, and let's be real, most people were, your love life was shaped by survival. You weren't swiping left on someone because their bio said, loves long walks on the beach. You were swiping based on, can they hoe a field without collapsing? Will they share their turnips in a famine? Do they look like they'll survive at least 2 winters so we can raise kids before the Black Death inevitably swings by? Romance was practical. Marriage was about labor and economics. You needed a partner to share the workload literally. Someone had to tend the cows, churn the butter, mend the clothes, and scare off wolves at night. Love was secondary. Affection? A nice bonus. Passion? Don't get greedy. Now, if you were noble or royal, the game changed, but not in a way that made it more romantic. Nobles treated marriage like Monopoly. Your hand in marriage was basically real estate currency. Congratulations, my son. You're marrying Lady Eleanor. Why? Because her father owns that nice piece of land near the river. Cue applause. Cue despair. Love, desire, attraction, all those squishy feelings, they didn't really matter. In fact, marrying for love was considered reckless, even suspicious. If you married just because you liked someone, people assumed you had lost your mind, or worse, that you were bewitched. Still, humans will be humans. Even in this muddy, political mess of alliances and dowries, people wanted romance. They wanted to feel butterflies. They wanted someone to look at them like they weren't covered in dirt and fleas. And so, out of this clash between duty and desire, the medieval world invented its own version of dating. Think of it like Tinder, but instead of swiping on a screen, you're exchanging glances at church, praying your dad doesn't notice. Now let's talk about communication, because what's romance without the words? Forget texting wide at 2 a.m. Forget carefully curating emojis. In the Middle Ages, your love language was the letter. But here's the catch. Writing materials were expensive, literacy was rare, and sometimes you had to hire a scribe to write your love note for you. Imagine the scene. You've worked up the courage to declare your feelings. You sit across from Brother Anselm, a monk whose entire personality is tired of your nonsense. You pour your heart out. You, Brother Anselm, write this down. My soul is set ablaze when she passes by. Monk sighs heavily. Yes, yes, ablaze, soul. Probably plague, but whatever you say. By the time your letter is finished, it reads less like a fiery declaration of love and more like a mildly formal complaint. And then, if you're unlucky, someone intercepts it, and suddenly the whole village knows you compared Agnes, the miller's daughter, to the Virgin Mary. Good luck living that one down. But when letters worked, oh, they worked. Imagine getting a folded piece of parchment sealed with wax, knowing it came from your secret admirer. For a moment, it feels like magic. Like someone in this damp, smelly world sees you as more than another mud-stained worker. And then there was poetry. Oh, medieval poetry. Entire traditions grew around courtly love nights, writing long, flowery verses to ladies they barely knew. Sometimes these women were married. Sometimes the knight never actually spoke to them. But that didn't stop him from writing, "Your beauty is like the morning star. My heart burns like a forge. Your eyebrows are like, falcon wings." Courtly love was less about actual relationships and more about performance. It was like medieval fan fiction. But instead of shipping wizards and vampires, you shipped yourself with Lady Eleanor from the castle down the road, who had no idea you existed. For peasants, poetry was a little more grounded. You might sing a song while you worked in the fields, or carve a heart into a tree, or awkwardly shove a turnip into someone's hands and mumble, "For you," romance on a budget. But whether you were dictating your soul's torment to a bored monk, or humming a little tune about the pretty girl at the well, love letters and poetry gave people a chance to dream, to imagine something sweeter, softer than the hard grind of survival. All right, so you've got your crush. Maybe you exchanged glances at the village well. Maybe you locked eyes across the drafty church during Mass while the priest droned on about sin. Or maybe your dad just told you you're marrying the blacksmith's son whether you like it or not. The point is, you want to impress. But how do you woo someone in a world where there are no flowers from the corner store, no heart-shaped chocolates, and no Spotify playlists labeled medieval love jams? You give gifts. The turnip method. For peasants, romance wasn't about diamonds or perfume. It was about whatever you had on hand, which is why the humble turnip, or sometimes a cabbage, became a surprisingly common love token. Picture this. You shuffle nervously across the muddy ground, clutching a vegetable. You shove it into your crush's hands and mumble, "For you." She stares at it. You stare at her. Somewhere, a cow farts in the background. Congratulations! You've just created the medieval equivalent of an awkward first date. But here's the thing. In a world where famine was always lurking, a turnip wasn't just a vegetable. It was survival. It was like saying, "I want you to eat. I want you to live. And maybe, if we don't die of plague, raise goats together." Romantic, right? The chicken gambit. If you really wanted to impress someone, you might gift a live chicken. It was practical. Eggs, symbolic fertility, new life, and, let's be honest, a bit chaotic. Nothing says, "I care about you," quite like handing someone a flapping, angry ball of feathers. Of course, this led to problems. Imagine trying to casually lean against a fence and look cool while holding a chicken. You're talking, you're trying to make eye contact, and meanwhile, the chicken is pecking your arm and flapping like it's auditioning for escape. Smoothness. 0. Tokens of affection. For the wealthy. If you were noble, the gift game was fancier. You might send a lady a silk ribbon or a jeweled brooch. Knights often gave tokens before heading to war, a glove, a handkerchief, or a lock of hair tied in ribbon. The lock of hair thing was serious business. If someone gave you their hair, it wasn't because they were trimming split ends. It was a symbol of devotion, like saying, "Here's a literal piece of me. Don't lose it." And if you were the knight, you'd tie that lock of hair to your helmet, right next to the part that was most likely to get hit. Subtle. Public courtship. The awkward show. Courtship wasn't private. Oh no. Everyone knew. The whole village was watching. So, if you tried to impress someone by singing beneath their window, congratulations. You just woke up their dad, their brothers, and their grumpy neighbor who works early shifts at the mill. You didn't just serenade your crush, you serenaded half the street. And don't think nobles had it easier. At fancy banquets, courtship rituals were practically public performances. Knights would openly dedicate jousts to their ladies, announcing, "This lance is for Lady Isabel," before galloping into combat. Which sounds romantic, unless Lady Isabel was married, uninterested, or just there for the free wine, love potions, and questionable science. And of course, when gifts and awkward gestures failed, some people turned to magic. Love potions were the medieval equivalent of desperate dating hacks. Recipes promised to inflame passion or make someone fall for you instantly. The ingredients? Oh, just charming little things like ground up herbs, honey, wine, and occasionally bits of dead animals. Romantic. One popular potion was made from crushed mandrake root, which was rumored to scream when pulled from the ground. Nothing says "I love you" like a drink that might literally kill you. Mini scene. The bread gesture. Picture this. It's the village feast day. Everyone's crowded into the square. Bread, meat, and ale are being passed around. You've saved the crustiest, heartiest hunk of bread, and you slide it across the table to your crush with a grin. Does she get it? Does she understand that bread is life, and you're offering her your best piece? Or does she just think you're trying to get rid of the stale bit? It's unclear, but in that moment, your heart pounds. And for a second, it feels like you're not just two people in a muddy village. You're part of something grand, ancient, and awkwardly beautiful. Alright, gifts are one thing, but how do you actually flirt in the Middle Ages? How do you send the message, "Hey, I like you," without looking like a total fool, or worse, like a heretic? Spoiler, you mostly fail, but it's worth trying. The power of the stare. Let's start with eye contact. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. In medieval courtship, the art of staring was a weapon. You'd lock eyes at church during Mass because that was one of the only socially acceptable places to actually see your crush. You weren't supposed to talk, but oh, you could look. Imagine this. Incense smoke curling in the air, the priest chanting in Latin, and you, completely ignoring salvation because Lady Matilda is sitting 3 pews away, and her veil just slipped a little to reveal an eyebrow. An eyebrow. Be still, my heart. This was medieval flirting, staring at someone across a drafty, echoing church for 2 hours straight, praying they'd look back before the sermon ended. If they did, pure electricity. If they didn't, well, congratulations. You just contemplated eternal damnation while your crush thought about cabbages. Songs at the window. If you were bold, or reckless, you might try the serenade. Picture this. Late at night, you creep beneath your crush's window with a lute, or if you're broke, just your voice. You start singing something romantic, probably stolen from a traveling minstrel. It's going well until your voice cracks. Her father hears you first. The dog decides you're suspicious and will not stop barking. Suddenly, your romantic ballad has turned into a neighborhood-wide performance, complete with angry yelling and possibly a bucket of chamber pot contents dumped on your head. But hey, if she laughs at your misfortune instead of recoiling in horror, that's basically a like in the medieval dating game. The jousting flex. For the nobility, flirting could involve public spectacle. Knights would enter tournaments and dedicate their combat to their chosen lady. Imagine this. A knight rides into the arena, raises his lance, and declares, "This one's for Lady Eleanor," while Lady Eleanor sits there blushing, wondering how on earth she ended up on stage for a blood sport she didn't sign up for. Win or lose, the knight looks brave, the lady looks adored, the crowd gets entertainment, and sometimes this very public flirtation turned into something more. If Lady Eleanor's family didn't mind, of course. Big if. The subtle touch. Sometimes, flirting was subtle. A brush of hands while passing bread at a feast, standing a little too close while working the fields, offering to carry water from the well, just to be helpful. These tiny gestures were the medieval equivalent of texting, "Hey, you up?" Except instead of sending a message, you risked your reputation, your parents' wrath, and possibly a fine if the church caught you. High stakes, baby. Flirtation through food. Never underestimate the power of food. Sharing a bite of your pie, offering the last chunk of cheese, or sneaking an apple to someone was a coded love language. In a world where food was survival, giving it away meant you really liked someone. And if they shared back, boom, you're basically married in the eyes of your hungry neighbors. It's midsummer, and the whole village is crammed into the Lord's Hall for a feast. You've been waiting for this chance all year. Ales flowing, meat sizzling, and there she is, the girl from the mill. You grab a chicken leg and stride confidently toward her. This is it, the moment. You sit, smile, and offer her the leg like it's a diamond ring. She hesitates, takes it, and just as you're about to speak, the grease slips. The leg flies out of her hand, arcs through the smoky air, and lands squarely in the priest's lap. The hall erupts in laughter. You turn red. She laughs too. And for a brief, glorious moment, humiliation becomes connection. Welcome to medieval flirting. Messy, loud, and slightly greasy. All right, so you've stared across the pews, maybe shoved a turnip into someone's hands, maybe even survived a serenade gone horribly wrong. Things are looking up. But love in the Middle Ages wasn't all bread sharing and joust dedications. It got complicated. Because for every swooning glance, there was a rival, a parent with other plans, or the ever-present church standing in the background, holding up a finger like, not so fast. The problem of parents. In a medieval romance, your greatest enemy wasn't always a rival suitor. It was your own family. Marriages were contracts. Your father wanted land. Your mother wanted security. You wanted love. Unfortunately, your parents often had the louder voice. Picture this. You've fallen hopelessly in love with the baker's daughter. She smells like bread. Her smile makes you forget the fact that half your teeth are already gone. She's perfect. And then your dad drops the news. Sorry, son, you're marrying the tanner's girl. Smells like boiled leather, but her family owns 3 pigs. Think of the bacon. Congratulations. Your true love story has just been derailed by pork economics. The jealous rival. If parents didn't ruin things, rivals would. And medieval rivals weren't subtle. They weren't lurking in the shadows, writing angsty poetry about your crush. They were right there, in the open, flexing their biceps while hauling hay, or boasting about their prize goat that gives the richest milk. You might spend weeks nervously rehearsing your lines at the village well, only for Sir Show-Off to stroll in, grin, and casually hand your crush an entire wheel of cheese. And, let's be honest, you can't compete with cheese. Sometimes, rivalries got ugly. Brawls broke out in taverns, duels were fought in the fields, and suddenly, your sweet courtship turned into the medieval equivalent of a reality television drama, complete with villagers cheering from the sidelines, forbidden crushes. And then, of course, there were the dangerous ones, the forbidden crushes. Falling for someone of a different class, scandal. Falling for someone already married, double scandal. Falling for someone in a convent, that's not just scandal, that's potential excommunication. But humans being humans, it happened all the time. And medieval poets adored these stories. Secret meetings at night, whispered vows by candlelight, love that couldn't be. It was romantic. It was tragic. It was also incredibly impractical, since half the time someone ended up banished, beaten, or locked in a tower. But hey, at least it made good material for songs. The church, love's ultimate third wheel. And looming over all of this was the church. The church had rules for everything. Who you could marry, when you could marry, even where you could marry. And if you thought you could sneak around, think again. Priests were the original nosy neighbors. They preached against lust, wrote long lists of forbidden relationships, and sometimes even staged public shaming rituals for couples caught sinning. You thought being walked in on by your parents was bad. Try being walked in on by your entire village, because the priest decided to make an example of you. And yet, despite all these complications, the rivals, the rules, the stern sermons, people still fell in love. Because you can't legislate feelings, you can only make them more chaotic. The tavern triangle. Picture this: a smoky tavern, ale sloshing in wooden mugs. You're finally working up the courage to talk to your crush when bam, your rival walks in. He sits beside her, offers her the first sip of his ale. She laughs. Your heart sinks. So you do what any reasonable medieval suitor would do. You challenge him to a friendly drinking contest. 2 hours later, you're on the floor, he's barely tipsy, and she's gone home unimpressed by both of you. Love is hard. Medieval love is brutal. Weddings, bed straw, and the fine print nobody told you about. You wake the next morning to a new kind of chaos. Wedding day. Not the fairy tale version, mind you, the medieval version, which is part business deal, part spectacle, part slightly terrifying rite of passage. The village buzzes with gossip, the bells clang, and the baker's daughter, or the tanner's girl, depending on your father's mood, is dressed in fabric so stiff, you wonder if she can actually breathe. Weddings were, above all else, about alliances. Love was optional. Comfort was a luxury. And yet, somehow, everyone managed to smile through it, as if their lives depended on it, which, in a sense, they did. The marriage contract. Before anyone even thought about kissing, vows, or awkward glances, there was the contract. Written in ink that could smudge with a single nervous tear, it detailed property, livestock, dowries, and sometimes the exact number of chickens a bride could claim as her own. Imagine your poor father sitting across from the tanner, quill in hand, calculating how many pigs are worth the trouble of tying 2 families together. And there you are, trying to sneak a glance at your former love, who is somewhere nearby, probably wondering why cheese is more persuasive than your heart. The ceremony. Show don't tell. Ceremonies were loud, long, and sometimes bizarre by modern standards. The priest's voice would echo off stone walls, calling out the sacred phrases that bound 2 lives together, often before the couple even knew what they were agreeing to. Guests crowded in, some with serious expressions, others curious whether someone would faint, spill wine, or start a fight. Entertainment was cheap in those days. Music played, people sang hymns, and somewhere in the corner, a dog barked at the bride's veil. Tradition demanded everyone act as if everything was perfect. Inside, hearts raced and minds wandered. Bed straw. The most awkward part. Ah, the infamous bed straw. Modern couples might fret over who controls the thermostat. Medieval couples had to worry about sharing a bed stuffed with straw and herbs meant to ward off evil spirits. Not exactly the romantic setting one imagines. The first night was often more about endurance than passion. You were supposed to consummate the marriage immediately, but sometimes you had to fight the prickly mattress, the lingering smell of goats, and your own nerves. Imagine trying to look suave when you're battling hay poking your back. Charm meets medieval reality. Guests and gossip, everyone's business. Medieval weddings were public spectacles. Nothing stayed secret. Every spilled goblet, whispered insult, or accidental wardrobe malfunction became tomorrow's story. The baker's son might be caught eyeing the bridesmaid. Your rival might claim victory by simply existing in the same hall. And the priest? He remembered everything, judging quietly from the pulpit. You learned fast. Appearances mattered more than comfort, rumors more than truth. Love might flicker in the background, but chaos always took center stage. The inescapable feast. Now imagine the feast. Long tables, uneven wooden benches, and enough food to feed a small army. Ale flowed, pies were overstuffed with mystery meat, and someone always fell asleep halfway through the roast. Your new spouse is next to you, smiling politely, probably wondering why you look like you've seen a ghost or a rival with better cheese. The music begins. Someone starts dancing. You attempt to join, stepping on toes, almost toppling a jug of mead, and wonder fleetingly if this is what romance was meant to feel like. Exhaustion, fear, and excitement all mixed into a single, combustible cocktail of medieval matrimony. The honeymoon, if you survive the feast. The concept of a honeymoon existed, though it was far less glamorous than today's Instagram-ready beach escapes. Often, it involved being carted off to a relative's spare cottage, a tiny room above a barn, or even a damp chamber in your own family home. Privacy was scarce, and comfort rarer still. Here, the newlyweds discovered a truth that would echo through the centuries. Living together is mostly about adjusting to each other's habits. She snores. You kick the straw mattress in your sleep. The smell of last night's stew lingers in corners, and somehow, the family cow's distant mooing outside your window seems louder than ever. The honeymoon was, in essence, a crash course in tolerance, patience, and the art of surviving awkward proximity. Passion, if it happened at all, was often interrupted by a leaking roof, a sudden draft, or a family member peering through the shutters with questions no one wanted to answer. The in-laws, the true trial of marriage. Your spouse wasn't the only challenge. Their family came with opinions, expectations, and an unspoken sense of authority. The mother-in-law inspected your hands to ensure they were strong enough for farm work. The father-in-law measured you against the previous son-in-law, who apparently could chop twice as much wood and still look charming. Family dinners became subtle battlegrounds. One wrong word, one misjudged compliment, and suddenly you were defending your honor, or your choice of ale. Every small victory, being allowed to sit in the good chair, for instance, was celebrated internally, as if you had conquered a minor kingdom. Tiny tragedies and daily misadventures. Medieval married life was also riddled with small, absurd crises. You might forget to feed the chickens, prompting a furious lecture from your spouse. A coat of arms painted wrong could cause weeks of passive-aggressive sighs. That pile of hay you promised to move? Still there. Weeks later, it grows mold, and suddenly you were the subject of whispered blame in the village market. Love was not absent, it existed in quiet gestures, in shared meals, in the brief warmth of a hand held at night, but it had to survive the constant barrage of practical inconveniences, social expectations, and the occasional goat wandering through the kitchen. The midnight argument. Picture this. It's midnight, the cottage is dark, and you're arguing not about love, not about betrayal, but about the proper stacking of firewood. The tension is absurd, but in the flickering candlelight, every word feels monumental. She accuses you of being careless. You counter that she left the pot boiling over. Outside, the wind wails like a chorus of judgmental ancestors. Somewhere, the family dog barks in solidarity. And just like that, your first marital quarrel becomes a memory that will be retold at every future gathering, exaggerated with each retelling. Rain's End. Medieval advice no one gave you. Patience is survival. Expect minor disasters daily. Compromise is an art. The hay never moves itself. Keep secrets small. Villagers gossip faster than you can finish a loaf of bread. Laugh at the absurdity. Without humor, even the richest dowry feels like a prison. Because, ultimately, medieval marriage was a juggling act. Love intertwined with duty, chaos threaded through with fleeting joy, and every day a delicate balance between survival and sentiment. The long view. The years roll on. What began with nervous vows and prickly bedstraw evolves into something steadier, quieter, more complex. Children grow, fields change, neighbors come and go, but your marriage endures in small, stubborn ways. The quarrels about firewood become inside jokes. The endless gossip of the village dulls with age, replaced by a shared amusement at how predictable it all seems. Even the straw mattress, once unbearable, becomes a familiar comfort, the sound of its rustle at night tied forever to the rhythm of your shared life. Medieval marriage was not easy. It was rarely romantic in the way poets like to sing, but it was real, a constant negotiation between duty and desire, chaos and tenderness, survival and joy, and somewhere in the midst of it all, love found its way, not loud, not dazzling, but steady, enduring, and surprisingly human. The final dance. Picture this: a midsummer evening, years after your wedding. The village gathers for a feast, the music begins, and someone pulls you into the circle. Your knees ache, your hands are calloused, your clothes smell faintly of smoke and bread. Your spouse smiles, still there beside you, after everything. You dance, slowly, clumsily, laughing at your own mistakes. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter and lantern light, you realize that love has never been about perfection. It has always been about showing up, day after day, no matter the hay in the mattress or the gossip in the market. This, in the end, was the truth of medieval marriage. Not a fairy tale, but a story written in small gestures, in endurance, in laughter carried across the years.